Okay, next up, I would like to tell you about this capability called deep research. And this is fairly recent, only as of like a month or two ago, but I think it's incredibly cool and really interesting and kind of went under the radar for a lot of people, even though I think it shouldn't have. So when we go to ChatGPT pricing here, we notice that deep research is listed here under Pro. So it currently requires $200 per month. So this is the top tier. However, I think it's incredibly cool. So let me show you by example in what kinds of scenarios you might want to use it. Roughly speaking, deep research is a combination of internet search and thinking, and rolled out for a long time. So the model will go off and it will spend tens of minutes doing what deep research. And the first sort of company that announced this was ChatGPT as part of its Pro offering very recently, like a month ago. So here's an example. Recently, I was on the internet buying supplements, which I know is kind of crazy. But Brian Johnson has this starter pack and I was kind of curious about it. And there's this thing called longevity mix, right? And it's got a bunch of health actives. And I want to know what these things are, right? And of course, like CA-AKG, like what the hell is this? Boost energy production for sustained vitality. Like, what does that mean? So one thing you could, of course, do is you could open up Google search and look at the Wikipedia page or something like that and do everything that you're kind of used to. But deep research allows you to basically take an alternate route, and it kind of like processes a lot of this information for you and explains it a lot better. So as an example, we can do something like this. This is my example prompt. CA-AKG is one of the health actives in Brian Johnson's blueprint at 2.5 grams per serving. Can you do research on CA-AKG? Tell me about why it might be found in the longevity mix, its possible efficacy in humans or animal models, its potential mechanism of action, any potential concerns or toxicity or anything like that. Now, here I have this button available to me, and you won't unless you pay $200 per month right now. But I can turn on deep research. So let me copy paste this and hit go. And now the model will say, okay, I'm going to research this. And then sometimes it likes to ask clarifying questions before it goes off. So a focus on human clinical studies, animal models, or both. So let's say both. Specific sources, all sources, I don't know. A comparison to other longevity compounds, not needed. Comparison, just AKG. We can be pretty brief. The model understands. And we hit go. And then, okay, I'll research the AKG, starting research. And so now we have to wait for probably about 10 minutes or so. And if you'd like to click on it, you can get a bunch of preview of what the model is doing on a high level. So this will go off and it will do a combination of, like I said, thinking and internet search. But it will issue many internet searches. It will go through lots of papers. It will look at papers and it will think, and it will come back 10 minutes from now. So this will run for a while. Meanwhile, while this is running, I'd like to show you equivalents of it in the industry. So inspired by this, a lot of people were interested in cloning it. And so one example is, for example, Perplexity. So Perplexity, when you go to the model dropdown, has something called deep research. And so you can issue the same queries here, and we can give this to Perplexity. And then Grok as well has something called deep search instead of deep research. But I think that Grok's deep search is kind of like deep research, but I'm not 100% sure. So we can issue Grok deep search as well. Grok 3, deep search, go. And this model is going to go off as well. Now, I think, where's my ChatGPT? So ChatGPT is kind of like maybe a quarter done. Perplexity is going to be done soon. Okay, still thinking. And Grok is still going as well. I like Grok's interface the most. It seems like, okay, so basically it's looking up all kinds of papers, WebMD, browsing results, and it's kind of just getting all of this. Now, while this is all going on, of course, it's accumulating a giant context window, and it's processing all that information, trying to kind of create a report for us. So key points, what is CA-AKG and why is it in the longevity mix? How is it associated to longevity, etc.? And so it will do citations and it will kind of like tell you all about it. And so this is not a simple and short response. This is a kind of like almost like a custom research paper on any topic you would like. And so this is really cool, and it gives a lot of references potentially for you to go off and do some of your own reading and maybe ask some clarifying questions afterwards. But it's actually really incredible that it gives you all these like different citations and processes the information for you a little bit. Let's see if Perplexity finished. Okay, Perplexity is still researching, and ChatGPT is also researching. So let's briefly pause the video, and I'll come back when this is done. Okay, so Perplexity finished, and we can see some of the report that it wrote up. So there's some references here and some basically description. And then ChatGPT also finished, and it also thought for 5 minutes, looked at 27 sources, and produced a report. So here it talked about research in worms, Drosophila in mice, and in human trials that are ongoing, and then a proposed mechanism of action, and some safety and potential concerns, and references, which you can dive deeper into. So usually in my own work right now, I've only used this maybe for like 10 to 20 queries so far, something like that. Usually I find that the ChatGPT offering is currently the best. It is the most thorough, it reads the best, it is the longest, it makes most sense when I read it. And I think the Perplexity and the Grok are a little bit shorter and a little bit briefer and don't quite get into the same detail as the deep research from Google, from ChatGPT right now. I will say that everything that is given to you here, again, keep in mind that even though it is doing research and it's pulling stuff in, there are no guarantees that there are no hallucinations here. Any of this can be hallucinated at any point in time. It can be totally made up, fabricated, misunderstood by the model. So that's why these citations are really important. Treat this as your first draft. Treat this as papers to look at. But don't take this as definitely true. So here what I would do now is I would actually go into these papers and I would try to understand, is ChatGPT understanding it correctly? And maybe I have some follow-up questions, etc. So you can do all that. But still incredibly useful to see these reports once in a while to get a bunch of sources that you might want to descend into afterwards. Okay, so just like before, I wanted to show a few brief examples of how I've used deep research. So for example, I was trying to change a browser because Chrome was not, Chrome upset me. And so it deleted all my tabs. So I was looking at either Brave or Arc, and I was most interested in which one is more private. And basically ChatGPT compiled this report for me. And this was actually quite helpful. And I went into some of the sources and I sort of understood why Brave is basically TLDR significantly better. And that's why, for example, here I'm using Brave because I've switched to it now. And so this is an example of basically researching different kinds of products and comparing them. I think that's a good fit for deep research. Here I wanted to know about a life extension in mice. So it kind of gave me a very long reading, but basically mice are an animal model for longevity, and different labs have tried to extend it with various techniques. And then here I wanted to explore LLM labs in the USA, and I wanted a table of how large they are, how much funding they've had, etc. So this is the table that it produced. Now, this table is basically hit and miss, unfortunately. So I wanted to show it as an example of a failure. I think some of these numbers, I didn't fully check them, but they don't seem way too wrong. Some of this looks wrong. But the big omission I definitely see is that XAI is not here, which I think is a really major omission. And then also, conversely, Hugging Face should probably not be here because I asked specifically about LLM labs in the USA. And also, Eleuther AI, I don't think should count as a major LLM lab due to mostly its resources. And so I think it's kind of a hit and miss. Things are missing. I don't fully trust these numbers. I'd have to actually look at them. And so, again, use it as a first draft. Don't fully trust it. Still very helpful. That's it. So what's really happening here that is interesting is that we are providing the LLM with additional concrete documents that it can reference inside its context window. So the model is not just relying on the knowledge, the hazy knowledge of the world through its parameters and what it knows in its brain. We're actually giving it concrete documents. It's as if you and I reference specific documents like on the internet or something like that while we are kind of producing some answer for some question. Now, we can do that through an internet search or like a tool like this, but we can also provide these LLMs with concrete documents ourselves through a file upload. And I find this functionality pretty helpful in many ways. So as an example, let's look at Claude because they just released Claude 3.7 while I was filming this video. So this is a new Claude model that is now the state of the art. And notice here that we have thinking mode now, as of 3.7. And so normal is what we looked at so far, but they just released extended, best for math and coding challenges. And what they're not saying, but it's actually true under the hood, probably, most likely, is that this was trained with reinforcement learning in a similar way that all the other thinking models were produced. So what we can do now is we can upload the documents that we wanted to reference inside its context window. So as an example, there's this paper that came out that I was kind of interested in. It's from Arc Institute, and it's basically a language model trained on DNA. And so I was kind of curious. I mean, I'm not from biology, but I was kind of curious what this is. And this is a perfect example of what LLMs are extremely good for, because you can upload these documents to the LLM and you can load this PDF into the context window and then ask questions about it and basically read the document together with an LLM and ask questions off it. So the way you do that is you basically just drag and drop. So we can take that PDF and just drop it here. This is about 30 megabytes. Now, when Claude gets this document, it is very likely that they actually discard a lot of the images and that kind of information. I don't actually know exactly what they do under the hood, and they don't really talk about it, but it's likely that the images are thrown away, or if they are there, they may not be as well understood as you and I would understand them potentially. And it's very likely that what's happening under the hood is that this PDF is basically converted to a text file, and that text file is loaded into the token window. And once it's in the token window, it's in the working memory, and we can ask questions of it. So typically when I start reading papers together with any of these LLMs, I just ask for, can you give me a summary? Summary of this paper. Let's see what Claude 3.7 says. Okay, I'm exceeding the length limit of this chat. Oh God. Really? Oh, damn. Okay, well, let's try ChatGPT. Can you summarize this paper? And we're using GPT-4o, and we're not using thinking, which is okay. We can start by not thinking. Reading documents. Summary of the paper, genome modeling and design across all domains of life. So this paper introduces EVO2, large-scale biological foundation model, and then key features, and so on. So I personally find this pretty helpful, and then we can kind of go back and forth. And as I'm reading through the abstract and the introduction, etc., I am asking questions of the LLM, and it's kind of like making it easier for me to understand the paper. Another way that I like to use this functionality extensively is when I'm reading books. It is rarely ever the case anymore that I read books just by myself. I always involve an LLM to help me read a book. So a good example of that recently is The Wealth of Nations, which I was reading recently. And it is a book from 1776 written by Adam Smith, and it's kind of like the foundation of classical economics. And it's a really good book, and it's kind of just very interesting to me that it was written so long ago, but it has a lot of modern day kind of like, it's just got a lot of insights that I think are very timely even today. So the way I read books now, as an example, is you basically pull up the book, and you have to get access to like the raw content of that information. In the case of Wealth of Nations, this is easy because it is from 1776. So you can just find it on Project Gutenberg as an example. And then basically find the chapter that you are currently reading. So as an example, let's read this chapter from book 1. And this chapter I was reading recently, and it kind of goes into the division of labor and how it is limited by the extent of the market. Roughly speaking, if your market is very small, then people can't specialize, and specialization is what is basically huge. Specialization is extremely important for wealth creation because you can have experts who specialize in their simple little task. But you can only do that at scale because without the scale, you don't have a large enough market to sell to your specialization. So what we do is we copy paste this book, this chapter at least. This is how I like to do it. We go to say Claude, and we say something like, we are reading The Wealth of Nations. Now remember, Claude has knowledge of The Wealth of Nations, but probably doesn't remember exactly the content of this chapter. So it wouldn't make sense to ask Claude questions about this chapter directly because it probably doesn't remember what the chapter is about, but we can remind Claude by loading this into the context window. So we're reading The Wealth of Nations. Please summarize this chapter to start. And then what I do here is I copy paste. Now in Claude, when you copy paste, they don't actually show all the text inside the text box. They create a little text attachment when it is over some size. And so we can click enter. And we just kind of like start off. Usually I like to start off with a summary of what this chapter is about, just so I have a rough idea. And then I go in and I start reading the chapter. And at any point we have any questions, then we just come in and just ask our question. And I find that basically going hand in hand with LLMs dramatically increases my retention, my understanding of these chapters. And I find that this is especially the case when you're reading, for example, documents from other fields, like for example, biology, or for example, documents from a long time ago, like 1776, where you sort of need a little bit of help of even understanding what the basics of the language. Or for example, I would feel a lot more courage approaching a very old text that is outside of my area of expertise. Maybe I'm reading Shakespeare or I'm reading things like that. I feel like LLMs make a lot of reading very dramatically more accessible than it used to be before, because you're not just right away confused. You can actually kind of go slowly through it and figure it out together with the LLM in hand. So I use this extensively and I think it's extremely helpful. I'm not aware of tools, unfortunately, that make this very easy for you. Today, I do this clunky back and forth. So literally, I will find the book somewhere and I will copy paste stuff around and I'm going back and forth. And it's extremely awkward and clunky. And unfortunately, I'm not aware of a tool that makes this very easy for you. But obviously what you want is, as you're reading a book, you just want to highlight a passage and ask questions about it. This currently, as far as I know, does not exist. But this is extremely helpful. I encourage you to experiment with it and don't read books alone.